Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar presentation, Southeast Conservation Blueprint for Ecosystem Resilience. My name is Kara. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the program manager at Partnership for the National Trail System, or PNTS, and I'll be serving as today's webinar moderator. PNTS is a collective voice, a resource provider, and a hub for exchange, learning, and action for the National Trail System. As the only nonprofit focused on the 32 National Scenic and Historic Trails, PNTS brings together professionals, leaders, and trail and hiking enthusiasts to promote a thriving, accessible, and inclusive national trail system. As a quick reminder, the 2024 National Trails Workshop will take place in Tucson, Arizona, November 17th to 21st. Save the date for this exciting event that will be 3 days of learning, collaboration, and networking for trails professionals and emerging leaders within the trails community. Our call for proposals are open and registration information is coming soon. You can visit our workshop's webpage to learn more. Today, I'm speaking to you from the lands of the Onondaga and Haudenosaunee people. PNTS recognizes that land acknowledgements are an important first step in acknowledging that we are on stolen Indigenous lands. In a moment, I'll put a link in the chat where you can explore what native lands you currently reside on. Please let us know what lands you're joining us from and introduce yourself. Let us know what organization you're affiliated with. PNTS recognizes the need to commit further and engage in meaningful partnerships. PNTS is committed to working with Indigenous people, organizations, and communities, and having Indigenous people lead the way through initiatives such as our Tribal Consultation webinar series. And our commitment proceeds into the future through projects such as the Native Lands National Trails Project, which provides resources to help advance National Trail System awareness and education of Indigenous knowledge and stewardship. During today's webinar, you will learn about the Southeast Conservation Adaptation Strategy Partnership, a regional conservation initiative working to design and achieve a connected network of lands and waters across the Southeast and Caribbean. This webinar is being recorded and will be available to everyone that registered following this live presentation. We have an hour today for the session, and so we'll have time at the end for Q&A with our speaker. Please put any questions or comments you have into the chat as we go. Now it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker. Hilary Morris is a user support specialist for the Southeast Conservation Blueprint and also serves as the communications lead for the Southeast Conservation Adaptation Strategy Partnership. She received a Bachelor of Science degree in biology and Bachelor of Arts degree in environmental science and policy from Duke University, as well as a master's degree in natural resources from North Carolina State University. Her graduate research focused on forestry extension and the attitudes of professional foresters towards climate change. Hilary has 10 years of experience working in landscape scale conservation and science communication in the Southeast. She is passionate about connecting lands and waters to support thriving ecosystems, fish and wildlife populations, and communities. She believes in the power of strong partnerships, innovative science, and user-friendly tools to bring together the conservation community to achieve shared goals. And now it's my pleasure to hand it off to Hilary.
Thanks so much for that intro, Kara. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all. Let me go ahead and share my slides here. Hopefully that's coming through okay.
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, awesome. Well, I'll jump right in. Again, thank you all so much for having me. I'm here to talk a little bit about the Southeast Conservation Blueprint and how it can serve as a tool to help folks build resilience in their work. So as Kara mentioned, I work for the Southeast Conservation Adaptation Strategy, or SECAS partnership. And SECAS is a regional conservation initiative that spans 15 states of the Southeast, as well as Puerto Rico, the US Virgin Islands, and the surrounding marine environment. We work in the Atlantic and the Gulf out to the end of US waters. At kind of a high governance level, SECAS was established in 2011 by the states of the Southeastern Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, and it's co-led by the federal natural resource agencies working in the Southeast. We also have representation from a handful of nonprofit organizations as well. So all of the folks represented on this slide designate a point of contact who participates in decisions about the partnership. At a more grassroots level, more than 2,000 people from over 500 organizations have been involved in SECAS so far. What does SECAS do? We set a bold vision and an ambitious goal for what we want the conservation future of our region to look like. We design and help people implement a blueprint for action that shows where on the landscape we can best work together to achieve that vision and goal. And then we really do whatever we can to clear barriers to working together across state lines. Our guiding vision, which Kara kind of touched on, is a connected network of lands and waters that supports thriving fish and wildlife populations and improved quality of life for people. So it's sort of this marriage of the natural and the cultural resources that we're trying to sustain. That's a pretty lofty vision, and so to give us something a little bit more measurable and actionable to work toward, we also have this overarching goal that we're trying to achieve, and that's a 10% or greater improvement in the health, function, and connectivity of southeastern ecosystems by the year 2060. Every year we release a report called the SECAS Goal Report, where we track progress toward achieving that goal. And we do that by taking the most recent available data from Southeast-wide monitoring programs since SECAS was established back in 2011. And we essentially crunch the numbers to compute trends in a series of indicators that represent that ecosystem health, function, and connectivity in the goal. So the idea here is that we're able to see at a glance, what is the collective impact of our work as a conservation community? What's it all adding up to? And where are we doing really well, where we just need to keep up the good work? These are the indicators that you see in the green. For example, things like aquatic connectivity, we're doing incredibly well on aquatic connectivity, removing dams, implementing fish passage. Where are the things that are increasing but not fast enough to meet that goal, where we might need to step up our game a little bit? And then what are those resources that are really in the red? They're actually in decline, they're going the wrong way, where we might need to make a really concerted investment of time and resources to turn that trend around. And a good example of that would be our pine and prairie birds indicator. Since the first SECAS goal report was released back in 2018, pine and prairie birds have been the most off track to meet the goal. We know that our grassland and disturbance-dependent birds are really struggling, especially compared to more of our upland and wetland forest bird communities. And that brings us to the primary product of SECAS, and the main thing that I wanted to talk to you all about today, which is the Southeast Conservation Blueprint. The blueprint is a living spatial plan, a map that identifies priority areas for that connected network of lands and waters that's called for in the SECAS vision. So the blueprint is based on a suite of natural and cultural resource indicators and a connectivity analysis. I'll talk a little bit more about how the blueprint works in a moment. And it's prioritizing 50% of the lands and waters of the SECAS geography. So about half of our region is in some shade of purple or gray on this map. A few things I always like to encourage folks to keep in mind as they explore the blueprint for the first time. The blueprint is intended to identify areas where you might take a range of different conservation actions. So not just land protection, but also management and restoration and working with private landowners on economic incentives. The blueprint is very much a work in progress. We update the blueprint every single year to incorporate new data and input from new partners. And in fact, we're so passionate about this that we actually publish a list of what we call known issues with every version of the blueprint that documents everything it's not doing as well as it should, as far as we're aware. And we do that for transparency, but also because it's enormously helpful to us as staff to inform what are the most important things for us to fix in the next version of the blueprint. So it keeps getting better and better. And then lastly, the blueprint is intended to provide a regional perspective and to be used in combination with local data and knowledge. So I'm never getting up in front of folks like y'all and saying, you know, drop what you're doing, use the blueprint instead. It's very much intended to complement the data and the information that you already have and help you show how your work is contributing to a regional strategy, how it fits into something bigger. So I'm not going to get too in the technical weeds, although I'm happy to take any follow-up questions about this in the Q&A for anyone who's really interested in kind of landscape conservation planning or spatial modeling. But just to give you an idea of how the blueprint works under the hood, Essentially, we start with a suite of natural and cultural resource indicators. These are data layers that depict different components and aspects of healthy, intact ecosystems. And these are kind of our data building blocks of the blueprint. These are things like resilience, regular prescribed fire, imperiled aquatic species, urban parks, greenways, and we're feeding all of these in to a conservation planning software program called Zonation. Zonation is essentially our prioritization model, and what it's trying to do is build a balanced portfolio where the best examples of all of those indicator data sets are all represented in the final plan, so that we have not only these no-brainer hotspots where lots of high indicator values co-occur, but also places that might be just important for one really rare feature that's hard to find anywhere else, so that the final blueprint is representing all of these things that we care about. Then we add additional connectivity through a least cost path analysis. So we essentially identify our hubs that we're looking to connect, and these are large patches of protected lands and large patches of highest priority areas in the blueprint. And then the corridors are trying to connect those hubs across the shortest distance possible, while also moving through as much blueprint priority as possible. And that's how, when we take our indicator-based priorities and our connectivity analysis, we glue them together, we get that connected network of lands and waters in the final blueprint. Given the focus of this talk on ecosystem resilience, I wanted to hit on how the blueprint can serve as a climate resilient strategy and help you sort of inject that into your work. One thing is that the blueprint and its underlying data are very much intended to represent resilient conditions and features of the landscape. So many of those indicators, those data building blocks that I mentioned, have a really explicit focus on climate resilience. For example, we use the Nature Conservancy's resilient land data, and that's identifying places on the landscape that have the underlying geophysical characteristics and the connectivity to be able to sustain biodiversity and ecosystem function in the face of climate change. This is kind of all about niches. So do you have that topographic diversity, the elevation, the slope, the soils that's needed to create all of these little different niches for species to occupy? And then do you have enough connectivity on the landscape for species to be able to move between those niches and get to the habitat conditions that they need for their life cycle? We also use the Nature Conservancy's resilient coastal sites analysis that's much more focused on coastal ecosystems like salt marshes and looking at their ability to migrate inland in response to sea level rise. So where do you have that connectivity for marshes to come inland versus where do you have barriers like interstates or developments that are preventing that from happening? We also have one of our aquatic indicators, network complexity, that's really focused on resilience. This is using data from the Southeast Aquatic Resources Partnership. And that's looking at the number of connected stream size classes within a river network. So the idea here is that the more of these different stream classes and conditions you have that a species is able to move to access without being impeded by like a dam, for example, the more species are going to be able to move to access the climate refugia that they'll need as the climate changes. But even our indicators that aren't focused exclusively on climate resilience, we still have this sort of underlying theme with all of our indicators where generally higher scores are going to be more resilient places. So in the fire adapted ecosystem of the Southeast, the more often you're burning through our fire frequency indicator, the higher you score on that indicator, the more resilient you're going to be. The more you're in a large connected patch that's not experiencing habitat fragmentation, the more resilient you're going to be. So this is kind of a thread that underlies pretty much all of the data that goes into the blueprint. The other thing to consider is that our corridors and our connectivity analysis do identify places where species and habitats can shift. Our corridors are spanning different climate gradients, and they're connecting coastal and inland areas. I'll also mention that the fact that we update the blueprint every year does help it keep up with a changing landscape. We know that urban areas are growing, we know that sea levels are rising, and if we didn't commit to keeping the blueprint fresh and relevant it'd be very easy for it to go stale and really no longer have relevance to the actual conditions on the ground. And we also know that as the landscape itself is changing, so is the data that we have to represent that landscape. As new data becomes available, as more recent land cover becomes available, we want the blueprint to be able to take advantage of those advances and stay as fresh as possible. And then lastly, we do make threat layers available to overlay with the blueprint priorities. If you're interested to see how the priority areas are likely to be impacted by threats like sea level rise or urban growth, these threats don't actually impact the blueprint priorities themselves. They're totally just based on the indicator score. So you don't score any higher or lower if you're likely to be impacted by one of these threats. But we know that these are huge drivers of how people are taking action on the landscape and how they're making decisions. And knowing that you're in a really high sea level rise risk area or a place where there's a lot of urbanization pressure can be really important context for folks to have, and we try to make that easy to find. Given the focus of this as a trails organization and a trails webinar, I also wanted to hit a little bit on how we incorporate outdoor recreation elements in the blueprint. We do try to represent as much as possible cultural resource indicators that represent current and future outdoor recreation opportunities. We do have an indicator of greenways and trails that looks at both the connected length of a greenway, how far you can go without leaving a dedicated path. Is it far enough to take a nice long bike ride or a run or a short walk? And also, how natural is your experience on that greenway? Are you going under an interstate overpass and it's kind of creepy and poorly lit? Or are you having like a beautiful, intact, natural experience where you get a beautiful natural view shed? We also have an indicator of urban park size that looks within urban areas at these really important outdoor recreation opportunities, these places where people can connect with nature. And then we also have an indicator we're really excited about. It's just a couple of years old, called Equitable Access to Potential Parks. This is using data from the Trust for Public Land and their ParkServe data set. What this is looking at is essentially park deserts, looking at places within socially vulnerable communities where people do not yet have access to a park within a 20-minute walk, and identifying these opportunities where the creation of a new park would really fill this gap in equitable access to open space. And so these are just three of the indicators related to outdoor recreation that are feeding into the blueprint priorities. So I've talked a lot about the blueprint and the data that goes into it. There's a number of places that you can access and interact with this data online. It's all free, it's all publicly available. The best place to start is the blueprint page of our website at secassoutheast.org. And I seem to be doing okay on time, so I might even just do a quick little demo here. So if you go to our website, secassoutheast.org, and you go to the blueprint page, if you scroll down, you'll see these three friendly green buttons that will guide you to all of the different ways to access our data. The first is our Blueprint Explorer viewer. This is kind of like Google Maps for the blueprint. It's a really good place to start because it's just kind of an intuitive point and click interface. In the Blueprint Explorer, you can summarize by HUC 12 sub-watersheds or by these hexagons in the marine environment. And so you can choose a HUC that you're interested in, a watershed that you're interested in, see which indicators occur there, how threats are predicted to impact. Let me choose a coastal one that'll give you a more interesting chart for sea level rise, and then partners that you might want to work with, protected lands in that area. You can also view the data for a specific pixel that feeds into the blueprint. So if I head over to Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge, the pixel that's in these crosshairs, it's showing you exactly how it's scoring. It's highest priority for the blueprint. It's part of a hub in the connectivity analysis. And this shows again which indicators are present here and how they're scoring. So Okefenokee is a really high priority because it has these large intact habitat cores. It's scoring highly on resilient terrestrial sites. It's important for amphibians, for forest birds. And if I want to learn any more about one of these indicators, I can click and see how the score range breaks down and where the score is for this particular pixel, and then read a description of what is this indicator measuring and why should I care? And then you can also filter the blueprint. This is kind of a new feature. So if you say like, hey, there is a lot of purple on this map, and which of this really aligns with my mission, with my interests, where I could contribute? You can filter the blueprint by identifying the part of this plan that scores within something that you care about. So say that you're really interested in looking at the parts of the blueprint that have high urbanization pressure. Well, you can look at places that have a high or very high likelihood of urbanization by the year 2060 and find the parts of the blueprint that are experiencing that urbanization pressure. Or if you want to look at places to do riparian buffer restoration, you might look at scores on the natural land cover and floodplain indicator and say, okay, I want places that aren't in perfect condition because I want to do some restoration. But I also maybe don't want the worst possible condition. So I'm going to choose this range of land cover percentage within the floodplain and see, okay, these might be places where I might want to tackle some riparian buffer work. The coolest thing about this viewer, in my opinion, is that you can actually upload a shapefile and spit out a detailed report of the priorities for your area of interest. And I'm not talking about like a quick and dirty 2-pager. This is a detailed, like up to 60 pages of maps and analysis of the blueprint, the hubs and corridors, all of that underlying indicator data that I talked about. And then those threat layers, how you're predicted to be impacted by sea level rise, by urban growth, whether there's any protected lands nearby your area. So this can be a really powerful tool if you would like to look at how a place that you're working in, or maybe a grant that you're trying to strengthen for the establishment of a new protected area or doing some management, some restoration. You can really use this to do very quick analysis and maybe develop some support for the work that you're trying to do using the blueprint data. So that's the Blueprint Explorer. We also have what we call the SECAS Atlas, and this is an ArcGIS online hub site for anyone who's familiar with AGOL. What this does is essentially share the map services for every single layer, the blueprint and all of that underlying data. So you can kind of cruise around here. A quick start map puts all of those layers together on one map for you. You can see the blueprint, you can see all of these indicators. Let's say that you were interested in that TNC's resilience analysis. I can open this up, it'll load a map. And then if I want to read more about this, I can click view full details. And this is all of the metadata for what this indicator is intended to do, why we selected it, what input data did we use, what sort of GIS processing steps did we use? So as our comms person, I'm really passionate about documentation, and I hope that you will find it as thorough. I am certainly interested to hear if you find any gaps or something that's not clear. But so this is another place to go and access our data, especially if you want to do a little bit more custom stuff. You want to overlay with other layers that you might have available in ArcGIS Online. You want to make your own maps. And then the last thing I'll mention is that if you're a real GIS whiz, you just want to download this data and run with it. We make that available too. We have a download package where everything is all zipped up for you, the indicator data, the documentation, even the code for the geoprocessing that we did to create these indicators is all available there for you. So I'll point you to our download as well. So that's kind of how to get a hold of our data if this is interesting you at all. But I want to close by talking about my favorite thing, which is how the blueprint's actually being used to make a difference on the ground. So this is really where my role in our partnership comes in. We have a number of staff that are dedicated to what we call user support, and it means that we are here to help anyone who wants to incorporate the blueprint into their work, whether that's to inform a decision, to strengthen a grant. We know that conservation professionals are really strapped for time, and it is a very tool-rich world out there. And so we know that if we want the blueprint to actually be used and not sit on a shelf and gather dust, we need to be prepared to support people and help them find how it can be relevant to them. So we'll do things like make maps, do analysis using that reporting feature that I showed you. We can write letters of support for grants if you're working in a blueprint priority area, help you with a conservation plan, and we hope that you'll reach out. I'll have my contact information here at the end. And so in that spirit, we track how the blueprint's being used and how it's really making a difference, because this is what we care about. We don't want the blueprint just to be out there and not be useful to anyone. So far, more than 400 people from over 180 organizations have used or are in the process of using the blueprint to bring in new funding and inform their decisions. And in so doing, the blueprint has helped bring in over $190 million in conservation funding to protect and restore more than 300,000 acres. And these are just the projects that we're aware of, where someone's let us know that they've used it or they've asked for help. So the real numbers are likely higher than this. If you want to know who's using the blueprint and kind of how those 180 organizations break down, this pie chart sort of shows the different conservation organizations that we're working with. And you can see it pretty much runs the gamut of a pretty broad swath of conservation organizations, that we certainly have room for improvement. I want to share a couple of examples with y'all of how the blueprint has been used. One, looking back a couple of years, the Nature Conservancy in South Carolina reached out to us for help. They wanted to update their conservation vision for the state of South Carolina, which is essentially their map of conservation priorities that they use to set their own strategic direction and to communicate to partners where their priority areas are. And they decided to anchor this analysis on the blueprint. We helped them sort of filter the blueprint down, as I described in that live demo, to sort of find the parts of the blueprint that really aligned with what they were trying to do. And they were looking for big contiguous focus areas where they could sort of rally their conservation partners together. And so they ended up updating the vision to use the blueprint. And right away, they were able to use the vision and with it the blueprint to help advocate for the reauthorization of an important state agency and funding source for conservation, the South Carolina Conservation Bank, which is really dedicated to land protection that will benefit South Carolina residents' quality of life. And this Conservation Bank was up for reauthorization in the South Carolina State Legislature, and TNC used the blueprint to help show legislators that the conservation community is prepared to speak with one voice. We have thousands of people from hundreds of organizations who've come together, signed off on this plan, say, yes, these are where our priority areas are, and to show that this is based on really good science, really high quality data, and we can make sure that these taxpayer funds are being spent in a transparent and rigorous and replicable way. And so the bank did successfully get reauthorized, and with that, the bank embarked on its own prioritization to identify how it was going to spend those funds. And they ended up using the blueprint in their own priorities as well. And I really like this example because the blueprint was being used alongside lots of other data layers, things like threatened and endangered species and wild and scenic rivers and historic rice fields, and all of these many layers, these many priorities being represented in the Conservation Bank strategy. And so I really like how this shows how the blueprint can be used just to provide that regional lens and that regional context, but not to replace other data sets, to be used in a complementary way. And once the bank had identified its own priorities, then we started working with conservation partners who were actually applying to the bank for funding. And this is one of the success stories from a few years ago. This was a project that ended up being the largest conservation easement, the private easement in South Carolina's history. And the blueprint was used to help bring in $850,000 from the Conservation Bank and another $500,000 from the very first NIFWIF Acres for America grant ever awarded in South Carolina. And this was a really fantastic property. Protecting this property created a 50-mile wildlife corridor between South Carolina and Georgia, where wildlife could roam without ever leaving protected lands. This has a lot of beautiful fire-maintained longleaf savanna. It supports the endangered red-cockaded woodpecker. It has bobwhite quail. It has gopher tortoise, just a really spectacular property. And I do want to be careful not to take credit for this amazing amount of work that went into this project. It was really led by the Nature Conservancy, by a bunch of other partners. The landowners themselves donated a large portion of the easement's value. So this was enormously a team effort, but we were happy that the blueprint could play a role in speaking to the importance of this project and help them get some funding. And when I reached out to our user, who was David Bishop with the Nature Conservancy, he totally unprompted gave me this great testimonial about the role that the blueprint played in the Conservation Bank application. And he said that the Conservation Bank called out their application as one of the best they've ever seen. And he attributes that, at least in part, to the result of the blueprint data and the documentation that we provided. He thinks it, meaning user support, is a very valuable service and absolutely helped us get money. So I just share that to kind of show that, yeah, we were really happy that the blueprint could play a small role in helping advance this awesome project. Another place that the blueprint's being used, and we hope will continue to be used more in the future, is to inform local planning. We were working with the Catawba Regional Council of Government, which works in 10 counties in the upstate of South Carolina. And they help a lot of cities and counties with their planning, like comprehensive plans, small area plans, and other things. So this was the town of Fort Mill, South Carolina's comprehensive plan. And they use the blueprint to help identify habitat cores within their conservation plan, not just identify these areas, but also to look at some of the underlying indicators in the blueprint and say, hey, these might be places where we should focus on connectivity. Here are places we might want to restore riparian buffers. This might be a good spot for a pollinator garden, and start to sort of tease out some of the actions that would be most appropriate in these priority areas. And I'll wrap up just with a couple more examples that are relevant to outdoor recreation that I thought might be of interest to y'all. There were a group of 6 communities in the panhandle of Florida that got hit really, really hard by Hurricane Michael. And as they started to rebuild, they banded together to think about how they could promote their resilience to future extreme weather events and build a stronger economy that was anchored on all of the amazing natural resource assets and the outdoor recreation opportunities in their region. And they used the blueprint to help identify some of those key ecological connections in the Big Bend area and to show how these cities are linked with their natural resource assets that they could capitalize on. The city of Sandy Springs in Georgia used the blueprint recently to help bring in $3 million from Georgia's outdoor stewardship program. They put this money toward the expansion of a multi-use trail system. It went toward conservation easements and toward expansion of a boardwalk. And so this was a case where they used the blueprint and some of the underlying connectivity information just to show how their project was going to contribute to priorities beyond just what the city cares about, but at the scale of the whole Southeast. There's a really amazing nonprofit in Florida called North Star Legacy Communities that use the blueprint. North Star Legacy Communities is an area where there's a lot of amazing Black heritage and a lot of Black owned properties and historic structures, active churches, cemeteries, and they were developing a cultural heritage trail to really showcase some of this amazing history. And they used the blueprint to help communicate to city and county officials how this trail would also have a lot of natural resource co-benefits beyond just its historic and cultural value. And they were ultimately successful in getting it designated as a land trail opportunity in Florida. With enough support from neighboring counties, they might be able to get it elevated to a priority trail. And then lastly, we've been working with the U.S. Virgin Islands Division of Fish and Wildlife. We actually just expanded the blueprint last year to the U.S., to the entirety of the U.S. Caribbean, covering Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and the surrounding marine environment. And so with the new availability of the blueprint and a lot of the underlying data, we've been able to work with a lot more partners in the Caribbean, and we're really excited that the blueprint's starting to get some traction there. So this is one example where the U.S. Virgin Islands has created this new territorial park system, and they're using the blueprint to strengthen some proposals for funding to do land protection and expand public access. We haven't heard the outcome of this particular funding opportunity yet, but we have our fingers crossed for them. So with that, I'm just going to wrap up saying how to get more involved if you're interested in what I've talked to you about today, or you'd like to know how to contribute. Things like attending workshops to review the blueprint, or serving on indicator teams to share your expertise on one of those underlying data sets. Or if you're interested in using the blueprint, a great way to get more involved is to join our newsletter, which you can do on the footer of any page of the SECAS website. I'll just bring that back up. So on any page, if you scroll to the bottom, you see the subscribe for updates. Just pop your email address in here and it'll get you signed up for our once monthly newsletter and a reminder about a monthly webinar opportunity that we host. And then, as I said, here's my contact information, Hilary_Morris at fws.gov. I'll drop that in the chat as well when I stop sharing here. And I'd be happy to hear from you or connect you with some of our user support staff. Like I said, we cover those 15 states of the Southeast. So I know that some of you may not be within the Southeast region, but in some areas like the Midwest and the Northeast, there are similar analogs to SECAS that we can connect you with as well, that have spatial planning resources and staff that are available to help. So with that, I am happy to take any questions with the rest of our time.
Thank you so much, Hilary, for that amazing and super useful information. Really appreciate you presenting it. Does anyone have any questions for Hilary? You can put them in the chat. Or if you want to use the raise hand function, I will enable you to take yourself off mute if you want to ask something verbally to Hilary. you have any comments on the presentation too for Hilary, that's welcomed verbally or in the chat as well.
Yeah. We like to say feedback is our love language at SECAS. We're very passionate about revision and improving. So yeah, feedback on anything or everything is very much welcomed.
All right. Wait another 30 seconds or so and see if anybody has a question. All right.
Y'all are quiet. That's okay. You can follow up via email if anything occurs to you in the meantime.
Cassidy says, can you talk a little bit about the justification of using the blueprint as a third-party developed tool?
Cassidy, I'm not totally sure I understand the question. Like how people justify using the blueprint or
Hey, Cassidy, you're welcome to come off mute if you want
I'm
to.
sorry if I'm being dense.
Sure.
If you wouldn't mind elaborating, thank you.
Yeah, no, I was just kind of wondering, I think that there's some value in the fact that it is a third party developed tool.
Got it.
So all of these organizations who are kind of reinventing the wheel and coming up with their own prioritization and analysis, I was just kind of wondering if you could speak a little bit about, what the benefit of using this tool is over an
Yes.
organization developing their own.
That's fantastic. I understand what you're saying now. Yeah, I think people are finding a lot of benefit in it. I know a lot of funders are asking questions like, how does this contribute to partners' priorities and things like that? So with a tool like the blueprint that's bringing together literally thousands of people from hundreds of organizations to kind of speak with one voice and identify their collective priorities, I think it can be really powerful to show that hey, this isn't just important for me at the Appalachian Trail Landscape Partnership, or this isn't just important for me at the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission. This is beyond what I care about at South Carolina TNC. This rises to the level of something that's a priority across the entire region for all of these different people who are involved in the conservation community. So I think it can be really powerful to sort of show that unified message of value at a larger scale than anybody can really speak to on their own. I also think it can just be, we're really, really open to feedback. This can be a great way to avoid having to reinvent the wheel, as you said. It takes a lot of time and care and feeding to create these tools and these prioritizations. And I know I think sometimes in science, there can be really an emphasis on doing something cool and new and innovative and getting a really exciting publication or your groundbreaking methods. And then there's often less appetite or less enthusiasm for that maintenance and that care and feeding of that tool. And that's something that we're kind of uniquely able to do in SECAS because of the investments that our partners have made. And so we can actually provide that care and feeding. We can update the blueprint every year. We can say, hey, you can come to our workshop, tell us what we're doing wrong, and we will act on it. We will improve the data and try to make it something that works better for you and your needs. And we take that incredibly seriously. And so I think that's something that can also be a powerful talking point to say that you're using something that's really living and adaptive and that isn't just going to sit on the shelf and get stale over time. So those would be two messages that I often hear. And we really try to build that trust with people to show that we do take their feedback super seriously and we do make revisions based on what people tell us we can do better.
Great. Yeah, Cassidy, thank you so much for that question. Anyone else have any thoughts or questions? Austin asks, I work in Johnson County, North Carolina. I saw some areas that I thought were under prioritized, particularly our property I just viewed today. Is there a place or Dropbox where we can provide new data in order to increase the priority based on what we have seen?
I don't have like a universal repository set up, but if you shoot me an email, if you want to load it on Google Drive or wherever you have your data, if you want to just attach a shapefile to an email and shoot it to me, I would love to see what you're looking at, and especially to hear a little bit more about like what are the values that you're seeing in that place that we're missing, and that can help us target, what is it that we need to change? Are we missing the fact that there's a lot of great birds there? Are we missing the fact that it's part of a connected patch? Are we missing that there's really great aquatic resources here? And it can help us figure out like what are sort of the indicator levers that we need to pull to better represent that place. So if my email's in the chat, if you just want to reach out to me and share it really in whatever way is most convenient for you, that would be fantastic. Thank you so much, Austin. You're not far from me. I'm in Raleigh, so.
Awesome. Anyone else have any thoughts or questions? All right. Well, thank you so much, Hilary.
Yeah, absolutely.
Presentation was absolutely amazing. And yeah, thank you everyone for attending today. If you have any additional questions or would like to get in touch with Hilary, please feel free to reach out. I'll send her contact info to everybody in a follow-up email with the recording as well, and the slides to this presentation if you want to take a look at those again. Your feedback about PNTS programs is extremely important to us to ensure that we're continuously improving our programming. Before you hop off, please use the link in the chat or scan the QR code to take a really quick survey about today's webinar. And finally, please follow us on social media to keep in contact with what PNTS is doing. Thank you so much again, Hilary, and I hope everybody has a great rest of your day.